Hi, everyone. We're going to give it about another minute or so for everyone to join us, but we will get started right on time. But thank you for being here today. All right, so we will begin since I see more people are joining us. So on behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to session 2 in our 2022 Water Loss Webinar Series, Developing a Results-Oriented Water Loss Control Program. My name is Avery Davis, and I'm from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. So we're going to cover a few housekeeping items, and these may sound familiar to those of you who attended session 1, but we'll try to keep it brief. During the training today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box anytime throughout the session. We will be saving your questions for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording, our evaluation, and other information you may need. Additionally, in your control panel under your handouts tab, you can download a PDF of today's presentation slides, as well as an activities handout that will be addressed later in the presentation. This session has been approved for continuing education credit in the states of Tennessee, Indiana, and California. Attendees from other states are welcome to self-submit this training for credit, but we cannot guarantee it'll meet your PDH or CE requirements. Regardless, anyone is eligible to receive a certificate, but to receive a certificate, you must attend for the entire session, participate in all polls, and register and attend using your real name and unique email address. We will not accept group viewing credit. Certificates will be sent out via email within 30 days of the webinar date, and you can utilize this document to self-submit for credit. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact Small Systems at syr.edu. Now for a little bit about the Environmental Finance Center Network. We provide training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all U.S. states and territories to help local water systems achieve their goals and stay in compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. If your community or utility needs assistance with drinking water system management, please feel free to contact us through our request form, which I will be sharing shortly in the chat. So on that note, I can introduce our speakers for today. So we have research engineers Don Knoll and James Markham and Director Heather Himmelberger from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center at the University of New Mexico. So Heather, I'm going to make you a presenter and we can get started.
Great. So, all right, share my screen. All right, Avery, can you just make sure to see that my screen is showing and you can hear me okay?
Yep, everything sounds and looks great.
Great, thank you. And thank you everybody for being here today. I really appreciate your participation. And this is session 2 of our 7-part webinar series on water loss and water loss control. Today's session is going to be focused on developing a results-oriented water loss control program. And we talked in the first webinar, if you were there, about promoting the idea of a holistic team approach to water loss control. And we really see water loss as a much bigger thing than just water leaking from pipe or revenue you're not getting. It's a very robust, holistic program that covers your whole water system. And that's the approach we're taking today, is looking at the bigger picture of trying to develop a results-oriented water loss control session. Each of these sessions are intended to function as standalone trainings. So every one of the trainings, you can get what you need out of that training, but we do encourage you to listen to the entire series, the whole 7-part series, because that'll give you a complete picture of water loss control. And if your whole team can attend the trainings, that's even better. But if not, if some member of your team isn't able to go, or somebody you want to hear the information after you've heard it, we will post all these webinars on our website for later viewing by anyone who missed this live version. And as was mentioned at the beginning, while you can get CEUs for attending live, we can't give you CEUs for watching the recorded sessions. So that is one difference between the recordings versus the live. But if there's anybody, again, that you would like to share all or part of the session with, feel free to look it up online and share with, any members of your team or your system. And again, as Avery mentioned, I am Heather Himmelberger. I'm the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. And then with me presenting today will be Dawn and James. And we are the same three who presented last time if you happen to be on the previous webinar. And make sure to type in questions in the chat as we go. You might forget them if you wait till the end. So please feel free to type in any questions in the box as we go along. I think it's the question box. So, just make sure that you take the time to put them in there. We will address questions at the end. If there's any clarifying things, if we're using terminology or anything like that that isn't working for you, or you don't understand what we're talking about, please feel free to type that in and we'll address those right away. So if there's anything that we're saying that isn't making sense, or we use words that aren't clear to you, please address those right away with us and send that through the question box, and we'll be happy to answer those. We will have poll questions today, and this is going to be true for pretty much every session, that there will be some poll questions. This is one of the methods that the states use to measure your engagement and for us to be able to give CEUs. So if you want CEUs, please stay on for the entire session and respond to any of the poll questions. So again, keep that in mind. When the polls pop up, please answer those questions to the best of your ability. You can answer, as best you can. Don't worry about it. We're not going to hold you to any particular answer, but we just want you to participate in those polls. And as I mentioned, we want you to stay on for the whole session, for the whole hour, to get the CEU credits. If it ends up that we have a lot of questions and we stay on a little later to address questions, you won't need to stay on past the hour to get your CEUs, but we do want you to participate in the whole session if you're looking to get CEUs. So with that, I'm going to get started today, and we'll just briefly talk about some elements of a water loss control program. So if you do a water audit, and we talked a little bit about this last time, how there's a methodology to do water audits, and the AWWA, American Water Works Association, provides the M36 methodology, where there's a free water audit software that you can download. And right now, people are using both version 5 and version 6 of the water audit software. So if you do a water audit, that's going to provide information for you related to the volume, value, and validity of various water loss and non-revenue categories. And those categories include real loss, which is water leaking from pipe; apparent loss, which is revenue you're not getting but you conceivably could be; and then authorized unbilled usage. And authorized unbilled usage is water that we allow somebody to use, but we're not billing for that. But there's a big but here. We cannot drive non-revenue water to zero. So no matter what we do, there's never going to be a time where you can say, I have zero non-revenue water in my system. And why might that be? Well, there's always going to be some level of meter error. So even if you have the best meters in the world, there's going to be some inability to measure really low flows, or there's going to be a little bit of meter error that's going to creep in over time. There might be some computer or data errors that happen, and there may be some theft that occurs in your system, even if it's small. All of those things will result in apparent losses, and it's almost impossible to, or virtually is impossible, to get all of that gone. There's always going to be some real losses from pipe breaks. No system can be out there, delivering water under pressure and never ever have a pipe break. And you can't fix it, as soon as the pipe breaks. You can't be out there immediately afterwards. It's going to take you time to dig up that break and fix the pipe, and there's going to be undetected leakage, so background leakage on mains and services. So again, you can't stop all the real water loss that will happen in your system. And there's almost always going to be authorized consumption, either internal or external to the water utility, that you don't charge for. So those types of uses could be well flushing, firefighting, hydrant testing, street cleaning, you know, things of that nature where the usage is normal part of the water system operation. And while we might be able to eliminate some of the external unbilled usage by charging cities or others for, you know, like watering parks or things like that, there's still going to be those internal expected water uses that we don't bill for. So again, it's virtually impossible to derive this to zero. So that's not the goal that we want to set. Another thing to think about is when we're talking about decreasing water losses and increasing revenue, we also have to think about economics. So when we're taking actions, those actions are not always free. We might want to undertake theft deterrence, for example. So if we see that there's a big problem in our community and it seems like there's a lot of theft happening, we might decide to add locks to the fire hydrants so that you know, people can't access the hydrants as easily. We may want to develop a marketing campaign to tell the customers how important it is that, you know, they look out for theft and alert the water system if they see anything. We might want to deploy operators to spot check meters or hydrants or things like that. All of those actions will take resources. It's going to take personnel, time, and possibly money, you know, especially if you're doing something like buying the locks for the fire hydrants. That's going to take resources. So you need to consider those resources in the context of potential revenue increases or potential benefits. So do the cost of your actions outweigh the benefits? And then to kind of further complicate that analysis, the benefits don't always have to be just non-monetary, or don't always have to just be monetary, they can be non-monetary. So these benefits refer to social benefits, things that accrue to your customers or employees. So is there a way that you're making the employee's life better, or your customer, you're not digging up streets as much, something like that. And there can be environmental benefits. So even if the physics of the actual operation didn't make recovering all the water loss, all the lost water and gaining all the revenue impossible, the economics would. So even if it was possible to get your pipes to be completely watertight all the time, the cost would outweigh the benefits you would get from that. So the economics have to be weighed in there along with everything else. So it's going to be very difficult to even get super, super low, but it's impossible to get down to zero. But what we really want to do is strive to continuously improve from wherever we are. So that's where we're really after, is we're not setting the goal to zero. We're not trying to have like unrealistic expectations, but we want to continuously improve. So we want to look at every category of non-revenue water and see, you know, what kinds of actions can we take that will help us improve from where we are. So we're striving for economically, socially, and environmentally acceptable loss. So what is that in your community? It can be very different from one place to another. And continuous improvement is a goal to strive for so that you're always seeking ways to improve the situation. So if extremely low levels of NRW, non-revenue water, are achieved, you know, the goal might switch to maintaining that status quo, as conditions can change and force NRW in the wrong direction. And so we don't want to let our guard down. So even if we do get to a really low level, we can't take our eyes off of that and stop thinking about it, because it can quickly go in the wrong direction. So wherever we are, we want to continuously improve. And if we get down to levels that, you know, we really think are quite low, we just have to put in a process to maintain that from there. So we want to set and aim for achievable goals. So what might impact our ability to reduce real losses and increase revenue? What we have here is a word cloud, and this is taken from trainings that we've done in water loss to just show the words that come up when we talk about water loss. You know, what words show up there, and the bigger the word is, the more often it's stated in our trainings and when we're talking about water loss. So I wanted to highlight just a few of them. So the ones that are in the light green highlights right now, Things like thinking about benefits, thinking about your priorities, how you're going to measure the results that you have, how do you assess what you're doing, how do you look at your policies. So those are kind of some foundational things. And then we move up to the words that are in light blue, like looking about change. What do we need to change? How do we want to change? The time over which we're going to do things. What are the drivers for our actions? What actions have we taken? To reach to what are the highlighted words in the light red color, actions and results. So what actions are we taking? What results have we received? So we're really trying to look again for an actions that will get us the results we want to improve our non-revenue water situation. So all of these actions that are taken to either save water and or generate revenue are elements of your water loss control program. So it's basically everything you do, and you want to think very, very broadly about these actions, not just focus on, you know, what did I do for leak detection or testing meters. It's much bigger than that. So think very holistically throughout the organization what you're doing to help control non-revenue water. And water loss control is very much a journey and not a destination. It's not a place we're going to get to and then we can forget about it. We want to have it be part of what you do as routine operation. So it just becomes part of the journey of operating your water system. Just like you're going to operate it every day, you're going to have to be thinking about water loss throughout the year and not just think of it as a place to get to and then forget about it. And it's about moving forward from wherever you are. So you can be wherever you are at this point of time, and we want you to move forward from there. We don't dwell on the past, but we use the past to help understand the future. So for example, looking at your past break history can inform what might happen in the future with breaks. So looking at, you know, how did certain pipes perform over time in certain areas, like that might tell you how other pipes will perform. Or thinking about past meter performance might have some value in looking at what's happening with your current meters. So we can use the past to help us understand the future, but we don't have to be so caught up in it. We really want to think about moving forward and trying to improve from wherever we are. One area to start with is your policies and procedures. And your data collection to see what's working and what might not be. And there's always opportunity to make necessary changes. So with your water loss control program, you can address policies and procedures. You can look at data collection. You can collect it different ways and analyze it differently to help you in the future. And the best way to succeed is really to have everyone in the same boat rowing the same direction, no matter how many people that is. So that might be just 1 or 2 people, it might be 10 people. So it really depends on the size of your utility and how many folks you have. But the real point is all of them should be in the same boat, thinking about the same things. And James is going to talk about creating a water loss team in the next section. So we can talk about who should be in your boat. And we want everyone to share the same goals, which is about rowing the boat in the same direction. And Dawn is going to talk about goals in the last section of the webinar. So it's really vitally important that everybody understand their part in the overall effort and how the pieces fit together. And this is one of the reasons that we recommend your whole team attend the webinars. And again, if they're not all able to attend live, at least have them watch later on. With that, James is going to pick things up by talking about forming your water loss control team. So take it away, James.
All right. Thanks, Heather. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about developing and maintaining your water loss control team, focusing on the membership. In other words, who's going to be in that boat and why. If you don't have a team established, obviously step 1 is going to be putting one together. And if you do have a team established, hopefully this discussion will give you some thoughts about who should be on it. You know, essentially look at this as a review of your current membership if you've already got a loss control team in place. And what we often see in large and small systems is that, you know, developing an audit largely becomes one person's responsibility. And while that's sometimes necessary, because it's particularly in small systems, people wear a lot of different hats, putting the entire responsibility on one person's shoulders really kind of deprives you of that beneficial aspect of auditing and this sort of holistic approach to water loss control. And that is the unsiloing of information within the utility, broadening the understanding of loss sources, and more importantly, possible control options. And we repeat this a lot in our water loss control work, but it's best done, with a holistic approach in a team format. So, completing the audit is best done with information and input from multiple sources. You're going to need supply information, sales information, operational information, who's doing what, and then if improvements or modifications are necessary, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for them. So having a bigger group involved in this with people from different departments is really going to be your best way forward toward working toward that common goal. Have to think about, as Heather said, there are multiple different components to non-revenue water. There's water that we're using either internally or giving away on purpose and not charging for. There's apparent losses from things like meter errors and theft. And there are real losses, which is those leaks in our pipes. And those are all interrelated, particularly when you're looking at the water audit itself. What is left at the end of the day is real loss. So if there are errors in the other categories, that can impact what your audit looks like, and your audit, of course, can impact what sort of decisions you make moving forward. So it's important to really have the right stakeholders in the room so that non-revenue water can be addressed programmatically and holistically. And again, it's that crosstalk between groups within the utility that's the most beneficial thing about doing an audit and starting and maintaining a water loss control team. Heather touched on this briefly, but a way to identify stakeholders is to think about who's impacted by water loss and who can impact water loss at your system, or maybe more appropriately, who is not on that team right now who could have some impact. There's obviously some very obvious candidates for who should be in water loss control. You want folks from operations there. They know about the system and how it functions. You need to have management to help guide and prioritize activities. You need folks from the finance department, because from a budgeting standpoint, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for things. You also have to understand your incoming revenue streams. And as Heather pointed out, it's not about hitting zero. It's about economically sustainable levels of loss, and that's going to vary from system to system. So you're really going to want to have your finance folks involved in that so that you can really understand that revenue picture. Another critical group of people are folks either in IT or who have computer skills, because a lot of the data that you're going to need to both do an audit and also implement and track the effectiveness of a water loss control program is going to be in a variety of different formats, and it may not be specifically designed for the purposes that you're using it for. And I'll give you a couple of examples as we go through this. So you're going to need some team members that have some computer skills who can sort of dig into the data and manipulate it so that you can do the analysis that you want. But aside from these sort of broader categories, let's dig in a little bit and think about who within these larger groups we might want to have involved. On the operations side, obviously you're going to want your water operators there. They have system information, they understand operational procedures, and they're often going to be frontline data collectors. And you're going to need that data to determine baselines, which is one of the things that the audit does, but also to see over the long term whether your water loss control strategies are working. Those kinds of things are not something that you can necessarily implement today and see the results of tomorrow. These are longer term activities and longer term analysis. So those operations personnel are going to be key to your system understanding, data acquisition, and program implementation. But think about who else in the operations side of things you might want to have included, because in all likelihood, it's going to be more than just licensed water operators. You may have a different group of people that is doing your metering, and meter readers are often the best people in position to discover theft or suspected theft. There can also be frontline leak detection teams for customer side or utility side leaks, leaks at meters, on service lines. And in the audit context, if you've done an audit, you're probably aware there are default values that you can use for some of the non-revenue water categories that are a little bit more difficult to quantify, like theft. But it's important to remember when you're looking at those that those are one-size-fits-all options, and they may not be appropriate for you. And if you don't have any information about what's going on in your system, it may be difficult to determine whether the default is an acceptable volume for you, not an acceptable volume for you, or more or less correct, more or less acceptable. If you've got some data, you can start to make those decisions. So, just doing something as simple as noting in a formal way the instances of theft or suspected theft that are seen in your system might give you some information that you can then use to compare to audit results. And will also give you the ability to track that over time. Theft goes up and down with general economics of the country and of your region. So, is theft something that is staying constant in your area? Is it something that is becoming more of a problem that you might have to look at because, the only constant is change? Same thing with, the metering department might also be folks who handle meter accuracy testing and calibration, which is critical to water loss control data. So you may want to have those folks involved. Water quality, who does your flushing? How's that tracked? Are there strategies that could be implemented that maintain water quality but reduce flushing needs, like maybe using a truck-mounted filter system or something like that? So what you're looking for here is staff that can help identify issues, collect data, but also help you develop solutions and strategies for reducing loss, because quite often the folks that are sort of hands-on have good ideas that aren't necessarily being sussed out and brought to the table. And because that is our ultimate goal here, defining the magnitude of the loss problem, the type of problem, and then doing something about it. On the finance side, it's not just the accounting department. Your billing department is critical for getting good audit data and understanding what's going on. And they may actually have a better understanding of daily operations and how the billing software functions than the folks in sort of higher level accounting do. I mentioned earlier that data you use for loss control might not be designed for that purpose, and billing data is one of those areas. Billing software, particularly older software packages, weren't necessarily designed with water loss control in mind. Billing software's function is to convert readings into a bill, send that bill, and collect the money. It counts water to develop the bill, but those are slightly different functions, and it's really important to understand the processes that are going on inside that billing system, which for many systems is kind of a black box. Numbers go in and numbers come out. And quite frankly, any other software that you're going to use, so that you can extract useful data to, again, track your loss control performance and the efficacy of any solutions that you implement. And you really need a good relationship with that billing department to get the data you need in a format that's useful. You have to be able to tell them what you need and why, and they need to be able to understand your requests, understand how what they do impacts the loss control program as a whole, and the appearance of water loss in your audit. On the finance side, also, for capital improvement programming, we'll talk a little bit more about this in later sessions, but understanding what's going on in your system is key to effective CIP. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, but quite often systems don't necessarily have the best data available to them to make good decisions. And capital improvement projects, particularly mains replacement, are going to be impacted by water loss and water loss data. From the funding side and the infrastructure side, what kind of information do you know about your distribution system? Is all you have information about the age of your system? If so, you probably don't have the best data to make good decisions about what pipe to replace when. Water loss control data includes things, as Heather mentioned, like main line and service line break data, leak and work orders. That information is critical not only for planning how you're going to do repairs and where, but also for understanding what parts of your system are failing at a greater rate and where you're going to have to intervene. So understanding what kind of data you need and where you're going to get that is really critical. Customer service. Those folks deal with the frontline impacts of unplanned outages. They're also typically your main window into customers and holders of your reputation, and might be frontline data collectors, initiating work orders or service calls. So their procedures and how they do them become really important to understanding the loss picture in your system. How does a worker go into a system? How that happens often determines how useful the information is going to be later on when you're trying to mine it for data analysis. For example, can you look at your work order system and immediately tell which are suspected leaks on service lines or mains? I've seen many large systems where they can't, so they know that a break happened and that it was fixed, but no other information is available. And of course, I'm not trying to imply that this guy here is your customer service agent, but sometimes that is who is on the other end of the phone. on the customer service side of things, you might actually have to look outside your CS department for some of the information. This is a call log from a system that we worked with in Texas a few years ago. And if you look at that third column there at the time, you might notice that all the date stamps are during business hours. When we were trying to do an analysis of breaks in their system, we realized that we were looking at an incomplete data set, because in their particular city, after the water department shut, those calls went to a different area and were tracked in a different location. So having a complete picture is important. I mentioned management before. It's really important to have executive leadership as part of this group. Middle management often gets tasked with the day-to-day water loss control activities, and that's fine, but it's important to have those upper levels involved as well, not only to help guide strategy and prioritize activities, but also to provide the organizational backing and support for the loss control activities that you want to engage in. It takes effort, it takes money. You're not going to have all the money or all the time or all the employee power to do everything you want, so leadership can really help steer the boat that we're all rowing, so that we all get to the same place together. Everybody I've been talking about so far is essentially internal to the utility, but you might want to look externally, particularly when it comes time to implementation sides of things. We've seen systems that have a representative from the local fire department on their water loss control group. Fire departments may use a lot of water. We don't have as many fires as we used to, but they can be an issue, particularly if you have, fires or firefighter training. If you're a town with a training center, they may be substantial users of water. Fire department's also great data sources, particularly for small systems that may not have really good computer models or hydraulic models of their systems. They typically will have pressure information from hydrants all around the city. They may be tracking the amount of water that they're using when they're doing their hydrant tests, which will be useful for you. Quite frankly, they're opening and closing hydrants on a regular basis, so you want to make sure that they're doing that correctly and not inadvertently causing pressure transients that might have a negative impact on your system. So you can sort of see that there's multiple reasons to potentially have this particular outside stakeholder as part of your team. Same thing goes for the streets department, your sanitation department, your sewer department. These are groups that potentially could be using significant amounts of water, and you really want to understand how they're getting that. We had a system where the trucks would fill up from a metered station at the beginning of the day, and the rest of the day they were out in the field just filling up as needed. And that second half of the fill-ups weren't being tracked. Same thing goes, with your RECs department. Cities often provide free water to parks to provide nice places for residents to go, but the parks department is the one who's deciding how they're going to water, how much they're going to water, when that's going to happen, and if you're not charging for it, are you tracking it? Quite often it's one of those things where the decision gets made, and then over time, because the water isn't tied to revenue, it stops being tracked or isn't tracked as often. So working with your parks department might be able to impact your water loss. You might actually only work with an outsider group when it comes to the implementation phase of something. I've got a picture of a garbage truck here, which might seem like kind of an odd choice, but this is representative of an Arizona system that we worked with recently, and they want more granular usage data. They've got an AMR set up so they can get drive-by readings, but they don't have the budget to hire a bunch more meter readers to go out more frequently than once a month. So one of the solutions that they're thinking of is mounting AMR readers on the garbage trucks, because those trucks go by once a week rather than once a month, and that would get them some more granular data. It's not perfect, it's not as good as an AMI system, but it gives them potentially what they need at a price that they can afford. So you really do have to sort of think outside the box, and sometimes think of creative ways to get the information that you might want. Again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it's meant to show you some examples that are going to help you create that cross-functional team. And by doing this, again, information trickles both ways. Everybody understands what you're doing and why, and it gives the group the opportunity to understand what their peers are doing in other departments and how what they do impacts them. A big utility might hire a non-revenue water manager, but it's not really necessary. This can be done internally with existing staff. The key is to sort of work together. And remember, as Heather said, it's a journey. It's not a destination. You want to be able to sustain your team. You want to have a common goal. It's about process improvement and growing understanding. And understanding the inner workings, knowing what's going on, inside the billing system, what's going on with your SCADA system if you have one, what's going on with the data that's moving around and generating you revenue. You want to have a bigger understanding of what needs to be done and what time frame things can be done in. So you need to be able to make time. That's where that executive leadership kind of comes in. Those guys can often just make the time that you need. You need to be able to develop accountability. Doing this in a group format really helps with that because everybody understands their piece of the puzzle and how it all fits together. And that promotes, again, a forward-moving, progressive water loss control program. And last but not least, obviously, you have to have clear mandates and goals, which is what Dawn's going to be talking about here in a moment. And it's, I think, easier to develop clear goals and mandates when you have the people that are going to be impacted by those goals and who can impact those goals in the same room talking together. So that's a very brief overview of water loss control teams and how who should be on that. We're going to do our first poll question here really quick. Avery's going to read this out, but this is just about who's currently on your water loss control team.
Yeah, so the question is, who is on your water loss control team? And the answer options are operations staff, staff from other departments such as finance, IT, or customer service, management and or executive leadership, outside stakeholders, example, other municipal departments, or I don't know, we don't have a water loss control team, or not applicable. I'm going to leave it up for about 20 more seconds. Make sure to get those answers in if you are wanting credit for this session. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1.
All right. Yeah, that's kind of typical. Operations staff are typically the biggest group of the water loss control team, but it's nice to see that in many cases, there are other departments in management and executive leadership involved. Outside stakeholders is a very small group here, and that's also very, very typical. And again, outsides, yes.
I just wanted to point out that you said select all that apply, but it got entered as a single response only. So a lot of people are chatting in that they have more than the one that they picked. So there's
okay.
It's skewed. So just because of a click error on our part.
Yeah, that should have been an all we can apply. Well, again, this was just sort of a little bit of a data collection piece for us to kind of get an idea where folks are at. But again, it looks like we've got lots of different folks from various departments involved already in a lot of your teams, and that's kind of where you want to be. So with that, we can go ahead and close that poll, and I'm going to turn things over to Dawn, and she's going to talk about defining program goals.
Great, thanks, James. All right. I am not positive that those screens are showing the way they're supposed to, so if someone can let me know.
Wrong screen.
It is, okay. Let's see if I can switch them.
Here we go. We're good.
Thank you. I tried to switch them on my PowerPoint, but I wasn't sure it worked, and obviously it didn't. All right, so as we're switching to take a look at the program goals, I wanted to remind you to feel free to send in any questions you have at any time, and we will be addressing those at the end of my presentation. So we're hoping to have plenty of time to answer any questions that you have. So go ahead and start typing those in now. And we are going to kind of switch Switch topics here. We've talked about what a water loss control program might include. We've talked about who your water loss control program team might include. And now we want you to think about the purpose of your program. So what is it that you're really hoping to achieve through the program? What are you aiming for? If you can't really easily answer these questions right now, you should be able to in the coming days and weeks as we go through our water loss series. But we want to take a look now at how we can begin to define our program's purpose. So your mission or your vision statement really should be your starting point in figuring out what your program purpose is. The purpose can be defined in the vision statement or the mission statement. It should be the foundation of all that you have planned, all that you want to accomplish. So your vision statement should be the foundation of the program, and you should then build from that point on. And here, we're just saying the mission statement should really put everyone on the same page in your organization and help unify the actions that you're taking. So when we have a clear vision, we work much better as a team because we all know what the purpose is. So we're going to take another quick poll. So Avery, I can't see if, oh, I can see, never mind.
Yes. So this poll asks, does your water loss control team have a mission statement or an overall vision? And the answers are, yes, we do, and I can recite it from memory. Yes, but I couldn't tell you what it is. No, we don't. I don't know if we do. Or not applicable. Either you don't work at a utility, you're not on a water loss control team, or another answer. I'm going to leave it up for about 20 more seconds. Okay, the poll is closing in 3, 2, 1. Can you see those answers, Dawn?
I can't. I don't know why. I apologize.
No, I can go ahead and read them to you. So it looks like 10% answered they do and they can recite it from memory. 9% answered yes, but they couldn't tell you what it is. 39% answered no, they don't. 7% answered I don't know, and then 35% not applicable.
Great, thank you. So for those 10% that said yes, we do, and we can recite it from memory, I'm super excited because we don't usually get that high of a percentage to this answer. So that's pretty encouraging that some of you are on the ball and can recite it from memory. That's pretty impressive. And for the 9% that said yes, but you couldn't tell me what it is, I'm guessing that might be because it's overly complicated. So we're going to kind of talk about, and for those of you that said no, we don't, of course, we want to help you get there. So we're going to talk about some of what you might want to have and include in that mission or vision statement, so that maybe you can get to the point to where it really is guiding your program and putting everyone on the same page together. So are we okay? We're back. So whenever we're developing this mission statement or vision statement, we can select some topics that we want to include in the mission statement. And I've provided some examples here, and these are just examples. But if we selected the topic of stewardship of water resources, that's important to us. It's why we want to have a water loss control program. So we want that to be a part of our vision statement. Well, when we go to develop that vision statement, we might end up with a vision statement that's something like, our city will efficiently and effectively operate and manage the water system to ensure good stewardship of its water resources. So we can kind of think through, okay, what are some things that are really driving us? What are some categories, some statements of why we're really doing this program? And then we can use those to turn it into and develop our mission statement or vision statement. And then once we've identified that vision statement, it should lead us to identify the activities that we would need to do to meet the vision statement. So if we had that goal of effectively operating and managing the water system to ensure good stewardship, we should be able to start to think of what do we have to do to actually get there, to actually accomplish that. Well, that leads us to developing the goals for our program. So the mission statement should really guide you when you're setting your goals, and your goals should support your mission statement. So let's take a look at how we can use the vision statement to help us develop our goals. Well, again, we can pick some categories of goals that we want to start working with based on that vision statement. So again, I've put some examples up on the screen here of categories that you might pick for your goals. And if we think about that vision statement, we may want to write 2 or 3, or we may want to select 2 or 3 of these categories to write our goals around. So when we go about writing our goals, we want to make sure that they're really well thought out, and they should include specific characteristics to make sure that they're useful to the utility. And we used to talk about goals being SMART. You've probably heard of that acronym where there's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound goals. And while we like that framework, we think that these characteristics on the screen right now are more useful for a water utility that's setting goals specific to the water utility. So let's kind of run through this table. So we think that the goals need to be, first of all, meaningful. They're relevant to your staff, they're relevant to your stakeholders, they provide a clear picture of what kind of performance is expected. The goals need to be measurable, and they need to be measured in a cost-effective manner. So if it's going to cost you a lot of money to go out and measure something to be able to see if you're meeting your goal, that's probably not very useful, which is later on in our list. So we want it to be measured in a cost-effective manner. And it should be expressed as either a qualitative or a quantitative measure. We want our goals to be consistent. We want them to be consistent with industry practice. We want those measurements to be reproducible by others. So if I go out there and take it and no one else can get the same results, then maybe there's something wrong with the way we're measuring, or maybe there's something wrong with the way we've written the goal. We need to be able to reproduce those results. We want the goals to be useful so that it can help us to manage the utility. It keeps us on that path of what we want to accomplish with this program. And it should encourage improvement over time. And finally, those goals should be unique. It describes a specific attribute of the utility services or activities, and it's independent of other levels of service. So we've seen goals written that maybe combine 2 or 3 goals into one statement. We want to try to avoid that. We want it to be independent. We want it to be unique. We want to make sure that we're not trying to do too much in one goal statement. So those are the characteristics to keep in mind when you start to write your goals. So now we want to take a look at what some of those goals are. So some goals are considered internal, meaning that they're relevant primarily to internal staff like your operators and your managers. And some goals can be considered external, meaning that they're also relevant to your elected leaders and customers, along with all of the folks internally. So when we are writing goals, sometimes it's important to think about who they impact and who will need to be involved. So the internal-external discussion really is about how is this goal going to affect our utility and our customers, our stakeholders, our decision makers, things like that. So now let's take a look at how we can use the vision statement to help us develop our goals. So if we're using our vision statement and what we've learned about developing goals, we could decide upon a goal such as the one listed here. So this is just an example, but when we think about those characteristics, when we think about the the vision statement. Are we on the right track? Are we getting to where we want to be? So the goal here on the screen, the water utility will reduce the total quantity of real water loss by 25% as measured by the total real water loss from one year to the next, not percent of the total volume supplied. So are we being specific? Is it measurable? So another example here on the screen is just a goal that might help us better understand our water use and lead us to that better water stewardship that we picked at the beginning of, what we really want this program to be about. So if we look at what's on the screen right now, the water utility will replace 5% of its smaller customer meters every year, such that every meter will be replaced in 20 years. The larger customer meters will be replaced at a rate of 10% per year, such that all larger commercial meters are replaced every 10 years. So as we kind of drill down here, we think about the purpose of the program, we implement a mission statement, we think about some goal categories that could help support the mission statement, we have the characteristics of the goals, and now we can actually write those goals and make sure that it really supports that vision statement or mission statement overall. If we think back to those characteristics of the goals, meaningful, measurable, consistent, useful, and unique, all of those are important, and we think it's wise to think a bit more about the measurable characteristic. So why would we want to take a closer look at this specific characteristic? Well, if you think about it, our goals can't really help us determine how we're doing and help us make decisions about how to proceed if we don't measure them. So understanding what to measure, how to measure it, how to track it, who to report it to, all of those are important because it's the only way we can know how we're really doing. So if we go back to this goal, repair observable water main breaks within 5 days, 95% of the time. Can we measure this goal? Well, of course we can. But what would it actually take to measure it and report it well? Well, let's kind of walk through here and think about what would it take to measure this goal? Well, first off, we're going to need data. So again, the goal was repair observable water main breaks within 5 days, 95% of the time. So we know we can measure it, but what do we really need to measure it? What kind of data would we actually have to be able to collect? Well, we probably need to be able to collect the date the leak was reported, whether or not the leak was observed. If it surfaced, we know it's, we can see the water, the date the leak was repaired, the number of days between the observation and the repair. And then are there other things that we need to collect to be able to measure it? What type of data would you maybe want to add to this list to be able to measure it well? Then there are other types of data that we might want to collect to be able to help us understand the measurement. So we might want to include information like the reason for the leak. Did it happen because a backhoe hit it, or did it happen because of water hammer, or do we know the reason for the leak? What caused that leak? Are there 10 clamps upstream and 10 clamps downstream? So those kinds of things can be useful. The reason for any delay in repairing the pipe, the type and the size of the pipe that the leak occurred on, the location of the leak. And then again, I put the question up there, are there other things? I'm sure that there are other things that you may want to collect at your utility. Now we have to think about, okay, we know what data we have to collect. How are we going to actually collect it and save it? How should we store it? So there's lots of different ways we can collect and store the data. You need to think about the goal. You need to think about the kind of data that you're collecting and how and where the best place to store it is. So there's lots of options listed on your screen here. But when you're thinking about your goal and your utility and who will have access to the data, who will need access to the data, some of these might work great for you and others might not work at all for you. So we want you to really think about, how are you going to collect it? How are you going to save it? How many people are going to be handling it? What's the best way to make sure you get it tracked accurately? And then how often would we want to check whether we're meeting this goal? There can be advantages and disadvantages of checking if we met the goal more or less often. So sometimes when we're first talking about it, it sounds really good to say, well, we're going to check that every week. And sometimes that's appropriate, but other times you realize that the burden that you're putting on the person that has to get the report ready once a week, and the person that would have to actually go and implement any change in that 1 week window is probably unlikely to happen. So you're putting a burden on a person, maybe more than one person, and you can't actually do anything about it. So maybe weekly is not the best choice. Maybe monthly or quarterly is sufficient. You need to take into consideration the burden of reporting, as well as the time for reviewing the reports and the ability to actually implement change once you have the results of the data in hand, to be able to implement any change for that goal. And then finally, who do you need to report the measurements to? So think about how would you tell each person or group, and think about the format for sharing that information. We want to keep it concise. So, just think about the audience and who you're going to share that with. And there are, lots of different ways you can report it out. It's important to report the results of the goal tracking, and you want to consider your audience. Are you reporting to your customers, your decision makers, your elected leaders? What metrics do you want to share with that audience, and how is the best way to go about that? So we're just sharing an example here of how one system reports the results of their goal. There's, this particular goal of customer service to their decision makers and their elected leaders. And it has their targets, it has their actual data, and it has an easy to read key. So you've got those green triangles for on target, the blue squares for slightly below or in progress, and then the red squares for target not met. And this would work well in a board meeting. It would work well with a customer. It's clear, it's concise, it's communicates your outcomes very well. So one other thing we want you to think about when setting goals is the financial implication of the goal. So when we talked about this example goal earlier, there's an obvious expense to this type of goal. Replacing meters isn't free, but there are, of course, benefits to having a meter replacement program. So if the meters are newer, they're likely more accurate, which leads to more accurate billing. If the bills are more accurate, the customers may end up desiring to reduce their use, to reduce the bill. If the customers start conserving, you may not need to increase your source volume for a few more years. So if you were planning on, drilling a new well, you may be able to put that off. Just lots of things that can be beneficial to having newer, more accurate meters, but you have to understand the cost and the return on investment when you set those goals. Ultimately, you want your vision statement and your goals to really guide you. They should tell you where you're going, and they should also tell you if you're doing a good job of getting there. So if you're considering how your decisions affect the level of service you provide to your customers, you need to understand what it is your customers want, what they expect, and what they're willing to pay for. Customers also need to understand if their wants and their needs and their willingness to pay for those services line up. So this is really an opportunity for you to have a conversation with your customers about what the customers would like, what their expectations are, and how the utility, this is how the utility can know whether it's meeting those customer expectations by communicating with the customers about those expectations. But your goals aren't meant to be set in stone, never change. Once you start tracking your goals, you may realize you can't meet the goal because you can't make changes to your infrastructure in the immediate future. So you'll need to change your goal to address the fact that that infrastructure can't change. Or you may need to change the goal because your infrastructure did change, or for any number of reasons, and that's absolutely acceptable. Once you've defined your goals, you'll have to make some decisions about how to prioritize those goals. So if resources are limited and goals can't all be addressed at once, you want to address the highest priority goals first. We do have a tool available to help you prioritize those goals. And if you would like to have that tool, we would be happy to provide it to you. So we just want you to know that first, we want you to focus on really getting your goals defined, and then on prioritizing those goals. So we'd be happy to help you walk through any of that process. Also in the handout section today, there are applied activities. It's one file, 2 different activities, so that you can work on developing your team and prioritizing your goals, the things that James and I just talked about. So those activities look something like what's on your screen right now. So first of all, you're going to work on developing your team. We want you to think about who should be on your team, who maybe you don't have on your team that you'd like to add, and start to really develop that list. And then we want you to take a look at your goals. So we give you some examples and some categories, things to think about to really help you develop and prioritize your goals. Finally, we do have technical assistance available to you. Like I said, we've got the prioritizing your goals activity that we can share with you. And I think for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move us into our Q&A. So go ahead and make sure you're typing those questions in. We do want to remind you that we are here to help. We're going to run one final poll question. So Avery, if you can go ahead and run that one.
Yeah, so this question asks, what could you use assistance with? And this is a select all that apply question, and it should be set up that way. So the answers are setting up your water loss control team, developing water loss control goals, reviewing water loss data, audit inputs or audit results, completing the applied activities or the urgency evaluation, or something else. Let's talk. And I do want to note real quick that for the previous question that was supposed to be a select all that apply question, if you weren't able to get your answer in, but you did chat it in, we will count that as your poll answer. So you won't have to worry if you missed that question then. I'm only going to leave us up for a few more seconds, so please get those answers in. So we can move into our Q&A. Okay, the poll is closing in 3, 2, 1.
Great, so I'm going to leave our contact information up. I don't know that we really need to share the results of that one. So I'm going to put our contact information up so you can feel free to reach out to Heather, James, or I if you've got additional questions. I think we are right at time. I know we had questions coming in, so I think we will try to address them for those of you that can stick around. And if not, we can try to address them via email at a later date. James, do you have the ability to see?
Yes, I do. I was just going to say, so I've got the questions here, and I'll just sort of run through them in order. And I guess, Heather, Dawn, either one of you guys can jump in on these. The first question is related to meter accuracy, which is, what's the expected accuracy of a Census 2 meter that's 5 to 10 years old?
So I did respond to that one directly, but it's a good question to ask. I think that the best answer is that you should talk to your meter manufacturer or your meter supplier to get really accurate information about what their expectations are of their hardware and if there's software, both of those kinds of things. So we don't have like a list that says this type of meter this year, this old would have this kind of inaccuracies. A lot of it can depend on your water quality, the volume that's going through those meters at any given time, several different things. So there's not a great straightforward answer that we can just say, oh yeah, that brand, that year, 2%. So I'd encourage you to talk to the manufacturer or the vendor to see if you can get good information. And also, we do encourage meter accuracy testing or calibration when it's appropriate for your system. So we'd be happy to talk to you more about that one-on-one if you'd like to.
Okay, this next one actually I think is a good one as well. What message do you have for water systems that do have water meters in place, but where water usage monitoring and billing isn't in place due to pushbacks from the public and water consumers? So effectively, we've got meters, but we're not reading them.
And I want to comment on that one, because this has actually happened in some cases where a funder required meters, but the system didn't want to bill based on the meter. So even if you're not billing based on your meters, for other purposes, it is worth at least reading the meters. So I would suggest, even if you can't read them monthly, at least read them quarterly, to try to see if you can get that information for water auditing purposes, or to help you kind of identify problems in your system. So again, if the meters are there, try to get them read at least on some routine basis. And if all you can do is twice a year, that's better than not doing it at all. But if you can do quarterly, that's even better. If you can do monthly, that would be the best of all. So we have encouraged people, even those who are not billing based on the meters, to read the meters anyway, because that's really good information for you to kind of, do your water auditing. Without it, it's very, very difficult to do very good water auditing, and to just be able to watch what, trends in the system over time and that sort of thing. So we encourage you to read them anyway, even if you're not billing based on those.
I'd like to expand on that too, just about your goal setting and your vision for your program. I think whenever we bill a flat rate, we're kind of implying that water is not valuable or not worthwhile to charge for. Not always, but that's maybe the message we're sending when that's not what we want to send. So when you're thinking about your vision statement, you're thinking about your utility and what you really want to accomplish. I think messaging that water is valuable and, should be cherished and is important for our community to be able to function and continue on, and to be resilient. I think those are all things to kind of consider in how you message, and if you hope to get to a point to be able to charge on a meter basis, on a usage basis. It's about conversations, and having those goals in place can really help you define how you're going to have those conversations. So, and for those of you that are in East Tennessee with me, I'm about to blow away. So I apologize if you hear a lot of background noise. It's pretty terrible right now. So my apologies.
Well, and to further expound on your point, Dawn, collecting that quarterly or monthly, or even if it's only on an annual basis, read information and providing that to your consumers helps them make choices as well. Quite often there are small leaks going on inside a house that people don't see and aren't detected. My mom here in Seattle used to always try to be the lowest power user in the city, because the city would send out information that showed what a typical user uses and what she uses. So that information can be leveraged a lot of different ways. And from a consumer standpoint, it's often good to know what you're doing with a resource, even if you're not paying any extra for using more. Just knowing that you're using an astronomical amount of water might actually impact your customer base and institute some change. Another question: we're a very small system. 16 connections are produced minus consumed. Average is 15% a month, but it varies between 2 and 25. This should be constant if there's a steady leak, or if there's an inaccuracy between the well meter and service line meters. Does that imply theft? I would start by fighting the premise here. It's not necessarily going to be constant, because it all really depends on the timing of your production and consumption reads, and also your storage capacity. If you're not factoring your storage capacity, and particularly if you're a very small system that has a fairly large storage tank, that tank is going up and down periodically, and when you're doing all those readings, can really impact what your results look like, which is actually one of the reasons why a water audit, the AWWA version, is actually an annual look as opposed to a month-to-month look, because those variations kind of that can be very, very apparent when you're looking at just a single month, sort of smooth out over the course of a year. Anything else you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to mention we had a system that was very similar to what you're talking about, what the questioner is talking about, that had relatively good results on an annual basis and from very good to terrible results on a monthly basis. And we did find a lot of problems with double counting some data, miscounting some data. When you start getting in the monthly basis, it gets a lot harder to keep that accuracy up and making sure that you are truly counting the same water in, water out, and that sort of thing. So we'd be happy to talk more about your specific issues and deal with that further with you. But it is harder on a monthly basis to get those really accurate numbers of what's happening in your system and, you know, compare from month to month and make that kind of comparison that it should be 2% every month or something like that, because there are errors and things that can crop up when you're looking at the monthly basis. So definitely reach out to us and we can talk to you more about it. But it is one of the reasons we do annual versus monthly with that water audit software.
There was a question about whether the audio of this can be sent. The entire recorded webinar will be made available online, so that we can send out to everyone. This is more of a statement than a question, but I think it's worth addressing. I'm a small system for a Boy Scout camp. We have 3 wells pumping to a holding tank that feeds our camp. During summertime operations, water loss is something we don't track, but I would like to add flow meters to track data about usage and if the level in the holding tank drops during periods of non-usage, like the fall, winter, and spring months. Either one of you want to address that comment?
I think I would encourage you to go down that path. If you can get at least some metering in your system so that you can kind of have a sense of what's going on to help you if there is any unusual circumstance that occurs. Sometimes we have big leaks and we don't even know they're occurring because all the water is going down and it's not surfacing. And if we have no way to check on any kind of routine basis, whether that's monthly or quarterly, it makes it really difficult to find those big leaks that might be happening and causing you problems. So I think you're on the right track to try to look for ways that you can monitor your flow. So I encourage you to keep going down that path. And again, same as the last question, I would encourage you to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you more about your specific issues and what you're thinking of doing, because I think it sounds like you're heading down a good path.
Okay, so this is a really good one, I think. How do these activities of building a team, creating visions and missions, and establishing goals relate to the AWWA M36 methodology? I was expecting the approach to link with the M36 methodology when you brought it forward in the first seminar. And I can take a stab at this.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that, you know, the AWWA methodology is really about, or much of it is about sort of the numbers that go in. The approach that we are taking, this sort of holistic approach, is really about driving good policy, good procedure, which relates to data grading and the sort of accuracy and validity of the audit itself, but also making sure that you actually have the right information to put into a water audit itself. If you've looked at the water audit software, you realize that there is a single number for all of your source input. There's a single number for all of your meter error. And so there is quite a lot of work and calculations that have to essentially be done, for lack of a better term, off the audit books. You know, it's not actually in the audit itself. You've got to gather data, you've got to condense it, and summarize it so that you can put it into the audit. So that's step one. If you don't have a good team and if you don't have the right people involved in the process, it's much harder to get the right information in a right format in a timely basis. And then on the flip side of that, you know, once you've got an audit and you've got an idea about the magnitude of a water loss control issue or water loss issue in your system, you still have to go further to identify where those losses are happening. So for example, if it turns out you have a significant real loss problem, the audit's going to tell you how big it is. It's not going to tell you where in your system that's happening or what to do about it. It's going to give you some guidance, but it's not going to be specific. So that's where having that team and those goals help as well, because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's often sort of siloing of information and often siloing of processes where, you know, the left hand doesn't necessarily know what the right hand is doing. And since there's never enough money to go around and never enough hours in the day to do everything, taking this sort of team approach to it really helps you get sort of all your ducks in a row and make sure that everything that's being done is toward a consistent goal, toward getting good data, toward really understanding what's going on and tracking it effectively, and then making those hard decisions that you sometimes have to make about what you're going to do and what you're not to improve your loss control situation.
And I just wanted to add that M36 is like a methodology that's bigger than just the audit software. So there is an M36 manual that has, you know, additional information beyond what's in the audit. And the audit is meant as like a top-down sort of look at what you're doing and to kind of guide you to dig deeper. So if you just do an audit and nothing else, you're probably not going to have the information you need to go forward with very specific actions. And if you look at the audit output, and I believe we talked about this in the first webinar, there's 3 categories that are not broken down, and those are the real loss categories for main, services, and storage tanks. So if you rely exclusively on your water audit, you're not going to really know, is my problem main, services, storage tanks? You have to dig deeper. And if you're in a really small system, maybe one person does everything. So the Boy Scout camp that was discussed, maybe there's one person controlling the whole thing. So the team is really just a team of one. But as the systems get a little bigger, even if you're at several hundred or several thousand people, you might have somebody who's doing dealing with storage tanks and pipe, and somebody else who's dealing with meter readings and billings. And you've got to work together because you have to see the bigger picture of what's happening in the whole system. So that's why we're saying that I don't see this as inconsistent with M36. Is just looking at it, maybe stepping up above your utility and looking at it as a whole, because if you're trying to do a good job of running your entire utility, you have to bring teams together to work on various issues, and you have to prioritize, you know, what you want to do with water loss versus, you know, other things in your system. So helping you form this team is a way to get the information you need for the water audit, and then to take action, you know, based on those results. And you'll need more information and more help to really get those pieces together. So so I would say we're trying to go bigger than just the audit itself and get you into more of a water loss control mindset that is audit plus other activities to address the water loss coming from your pipes and tanks and those sorts of things, and then your non-revenue related to apparent losses. So you know, getting this sort of team approach will help you address all those bigger picture issues.
Okay, so here's another similar question. We're a very small system, 19 homes, 10 undeveloped sites with very limited resources. We've got a couple of wells, a 50,000-gallon tank, and some long-range plans for replacing old transit lines. We've applied for grants to upgrade our systems, but are also manpower short. How can we get help for a system so small?
Well, I'd say that's what we're here for. So please reach out to us because we are meant to help small systems, and there are, you know, other resources besides us. So please reach out. We would be happy to talk to you about where you're at and what kind of help you need. And if there's other types of help you need, we can put you in touch with other organizations who do other things that can help water utilities. There is quite a bit of infrastructure money coming down the pike right now, and they're trying to aim that for the communities who have traditionally not been able to get the money, which are smaller and disadvantaged communities. So there's a big push now to get more infrastructure funding out to smaller communities. So again, the timing is really right to really look at those options for you and see what you can do to get some help. So we would be happy to help you, and all the help we give you is for free.
Let's see, we're getting close to the end here. What solutions can be used when there are leaks on pipelines?
Well, there's lots of solutions. And it really, again, depends on your situation. This is another case we'd be happy to talk to you in more specific details about options, but in general, there's always the repair options. Sometimes there's rehabilitation options, and then other times the pipe has to be replaced. And you really need to look at, do your repair techniques work? I could show you a picture right now of a street in my neighborhood where there's literally 3 repairs on that pipe at the same time, and you could stand from one repair and look at all 3 of them. And it is probably about the 10th time this year that that pipe has been repaired. So I could also show you all the pavement cuts. You have to start questioning at that point, is a repair the way to go when it doesn't seem to be working, the pipe is not holding? So then you start looking at replacement options. So it's really a matter of, is it just a one-off, it's leaking and I can put a clamp or some other repair technique on it, or splice a new piece of pipe that's just a short section in there to fix the pipe and the rest is okay? Or is the whole pipe compromised so that, making repairs doesn't really work? So it's really looking at what's happening in your system, how it's performing over time to make those choices of when you really need to replace the pipe. And I mentioned there's some rehabilitation options. So sometimes, depending on size and type of pipe and your situation, you can line a pipe so that you kind of give the pipe a little bit of a new life. So that's an option too. So typically we can repair pipe, we can rehabilitate it, or we can replace it. And those are our main options for addressing when the pipes are not, functioning as they should be. And again, we'd be happy to have conversations because generally speaking, the pipe usually isn't all bad. Maybe there's a little section that's bad. And there's also condition assessment techniques. And if anybody listened in to the webinar we had earlier this week, that was a roundtable discussion of technologies. There are condition assessment technologies you can actually put through pipelines and kind of determine if that pipe is doing well or not, and then making choices about repair versus replacement. And that could be done if the pipe is a more of a high risk, high priority pipe, and probably not worth the funding if it's, a lower priority, lower risk pipe. So again, we'd be happy to discuss your specific situation more deeply.
All right. I think that may be the end of our questions. Yeah, it is. There was a question about putting the 2 different Boy Scout camp systems in contact with each other, which I will handle offline. That's the end of our current questions. So if there are any others, put them in quickly. Otherwise, I think we are going to wind down. We're a little bit over.
And thank you all for sticking in with us. I know it was a little bit longer, but we wanted to take the opportunity to ask questions or to answer your questions. So again, thank you all for sticking with us.
All righty, Avery, do you have any last minute comments? If not, I think we can wind it down and pass our folks off.
Yeah, so just a couple things. So following this webinar, once you exit, an automatic survey will launch through GoToWebinar. So we just encourage you to complete that survey. It helps us plan other webinars and workshops that are on topics important to you. Additionally, you will receive the recording, I know James already mentioned this, in a follow-up email following the session. So on that is all I have. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and huge thank you to all of our presenters today. And yeah, do you have any final thoughts, James?
No, I just thank you everyone for attending. We hope to see you in the next session. And again, you have our contact information there. If there is anything that comes up between now and then, you've got questions on, free technical assistance for small systems is a big part of the grant that this series is being presented under. And we would be happy to talk to you about water loss control or any other sort of issue that you are having. So thanks for attending, and we hope to see you next time around.